Good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to the ATU Reimagining Assessment and Feedback Symposium here in ATU in Galway City. We are delighted to have Dr. Michael Hannon, the Registrar and Head of the Galway Mayo College, to deliver our welcome address to our Reimagining Assessment and Feedback Symposium. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks very much, Karina. And maybe just to correct, it's not actually going to be an address, it's a welcome few words. So just in case you're expecting something more than I have prepared. So I'd just like to start by also welcoming everybody that's attending either in person or online to this symposium. You're very welcome. A special welcome to Dr. Jan MacArthur, our keynote speaker. Delighted to have you with us, especially in person, Jan. And I'd also like to thank the contributors to the other sessions from Galway Mayo, from Sligo, and from Donegal. It's absolutely great to see representation from across the three colleges of the university. And my final thank yous go to the National Forum, the HEA, and the N-Tutor project, which is funded by the HEA. Now, there's actually lots that I could say about assessment, but since I'm not the keynote speaker, I don't want to actually start crossing boundaries. But I'm going to say three things, and I'm going to more or less leave it at that. First thing is, over the years as registrar, I've been trying to get staff to reimagine assessment. So it's been something close to my heart. Staff design the assessment strategy for the modules that they teach, and then staff complain about the work involved in implementing that strategy. Now, that has always intrigued me. That's my first point. The second point is I've tried, not just here across this university, but in other institutions where I've chaired validation panels, to get staff to consider integrated assessment. I've always been pushing integrated assessment as an opportunity to reduce the workload, not just on staff, but on students, and to make it more interesting. And I've had some success in that, and I've been delighted to see pockets of interest and innovation in various sort of panels that I've chaired around the country. And so there is innovation happening over the years. This is not new, it has been happening, but at a slow pace because people are very reluctant. So that's the second point I want to make. And the third area I want to touch on is I have an issue with in the area that I have an issue with in relation to assessment in higher education. I would say not just in Ireland, but in the UK as well. And that is the extent to which we rely on external examiners. Or to put it another way, relinquishing our professional autonomy in carrying out our core activity. That's how I would regard the extent to which we're relying on external examiners. But that needs to be reimagined. So I'm not going to unpick those three statements because that could take up the whole morning, but there's something there that maybe you might reflect on at some point, because I think they are worth reflecting. I absolutely agree with Dr. MacArthur that assessment in higher education has long been in need of substantial reform. I've been pushing that agenda for quite some time, and I look forward to hearing what that reform might look like and how we might continue to reimagine assessment. So I'd like to wish you good luck with the symposium, and I'm really looking forward to the keynote speaker. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael, and welcome everybody online across the ATU. And I know we have colleagues in N-Tutor and even the EU Green Alliance project that have joined this assessment symposium this morning. So you're all very welcome. And I am now going to introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Jan MacArthur. She is a senior lecturer in education and social justice in Lancaster University. Her research spans the areas of the purposes of higher education and everyday teaching, learning and assessment. It is strongly based on critical theory and an explicit orientation to greater social justice within and through education. So her recent work has focused on assessment and social justice and even academic integrity, which we will be discussing this morning. And she believes this is perhaps the social justice and assessment side has been previously neglected. Writers on assessment focus at most on fair process rather than more complex understandings of social justice, and writers on social justice avoid the complexities of assessment. So we're really looking forward to your keynote this morning, and it's wonderful you could join us, Jan, here in person in ATU in the Galway campus. So without further ado, you can, everything's okay? So delighted to introduce Jan. So yeah, you can take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that welcome. Hello everyone. It is really lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I haven't been to Galway before, but I've absolutely fallen in love with it. So you might see me back again, just hanging around, wanting to talk about assessment. So before I begin this idea of reimagining, a quote that I've borrowed from a book from John Law, which originally comes from Alice in Wonderland. "There is no use in trying," said Alice. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." So reimagining is about opening up that thinking about those impossible things. Because in assessment, there's a lot of things we're told we can't do, we shouldn't do, you know, it won't work, it's not practical, blah, 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 blah. And I think we have to be prepared to think outside that. We are in this world when we talk about academic integrity, and we can't avoid talking about ChatGPT, but I try to avoid talking about it, partly because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know where we're going with artificial intelligence. There are all these dystopian and utopian views, but I find it quite frightening, and I find it quite overwhelming. And I find myself just looking for some quiet time to think about these things. And that would be my advice, that we are living in an unimaginable world developing around us. And so we just probably need to be a bit quiet and contemplative and not rush to think we've got a solution, because we don't even know what the problems are or what the opportunities are. And it's fine to speculate a bit, but we also need to just hold back. And just bear with me, I've got a couple more slides that are really just setting the mood. But this idea of, you know, finding perspective in this world that's so hard to imagine. I often come back to Carl Sagan's beautiful book, The Pale Blue Dot. And in it, he talks about all those battles and harm and injustice that's happened on this tiny pale blue dot, all for these minuscule bits of land. And he just makes it seem so silly. And yet he's not saying human beings are insignificant. He's saying quite the opposite, that when we think about the context of us, we're just living on this tiny blue dot, and yet tiny pale blue dot, and yet our human beingness is significant. And for me, it's not romantic, it's quite practical to think that's where we need to be looking as we face these difficult times. And if I may indulge myself, one of my favourite things in Ireland before I discovered Galway is the Colic Stone Head, which is in the Dublin Museum. And what's extraordinary about it is there's actually 3 faces, but you can only ever see 2. So you always have to be imagining. There's always that other one, from whatever angle you look, and you can go to the museum, you can go right around it. But you always have to imagine and think about that other face that's there, but you can't see it. So the challenge for me, for us, I believe, is not that some worlds are unimaginable, but rather that we approach new worlds with a lack of imagination. And that's where I think we should look as we face the challenges around us. And I want to warn against what I call a colonial mindset, which is an inability to imagine life lived otherwise. And this is, of course, what defined the colonial era of European domination of the world, this assumed supremacy And not just that, it wasn't just the assumed supremacy. And I'm Australian, by the way, if you can't tell from my accent. So, but there was even this greater danger of assumed nothingness. You know, in Australia, they referred to terra nullius, you know, nobody's land, even though it was populated. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be careful of, this assumed idea we don't have anything to offer already in this strange new world of artificial intelligence and so forth. And so when I think about artificial intelligence, I'm inclined to think, are we the colonizers or are we being colonized? And I promise not to show that, but maybe we should know who the actual colonizer is when we think about assessment in higher education. So if we think about this idea of a decolonized age, we hope we would be neither the colonizer nor the colonized. And earlier work by critical theorist Maxine Green, she talks about education as always imagining otherwise. And I think there's something here that, you know, this idea as we are working to have a decolonial approach to knowledge, to each other, to others, that we have to keep in mind that education is always about imagining otherwise. That's what learning is. It's thinking one thing and then thinking something else. And academic work also is always about engaging with the minds of others. And for me, when we talk about academic integrity, I want to put that front and centre because that's what's get lost by some of the technological approaches to academic integrity. There is nothing wrong with engaging with the minds of others. It's actually the entire purpose of academic work. Of course, we do it respectfully and with integrity, but engaging with the minds of others is at the heart of what we do. And are we ensuring our students understand that? So back to assessment, those are my sort of general thoughts about things. So I think we need, as I say, to learn the lessons of decolonialism, of going back and imagining again. And because I see the solutions, if we are needing solutions to what faces us ahead, is actually going to go back and rethink how we've solved some of the so-called problems already. Because I think we've gone down wrong paths, and revisiting those and rethinking them with new eyes is part of what we need to do. And we need to put this at the forefront of assessment. And this doesn't mean just more of the same but louder, doesn't mean that things that have to be really expensive and hyped. The solutions might just be the everyday good practice that in your hearts you've always wanted to do and you've tried to do. And I think we overlook that too often. So to the core of my talk this morning, about reimagining assessment on authenticity in an unimaginable world. So I'm going to look at this through three interrelated ideas. I've split them apart just as trying to find some linear way of organising my thoughts, but all three are actually interrelate. The first to the place that technology has in what we do in assessment and in ensuring integrity. We worry that students are misusing technology. We worry that students are looking things up on the web or doing whatever. But where do we look for the solutions for this problem? We always seem to go back to looking for a technological solution. Maybe this isn't happening in Ireland. Please tell me. But in the UK, I am dismayed how quickly universities embraced and paid big money for the AI detector add-in of Turnitin, which was developed, you know, in a few days. I mean, we don't even yet know how generative AI works. How on earth can we be saying we can detect it? And all the evidence is that these things, they'll detect low level. So the more you can afford, the better you can get by your work in, the less likely you are to be caught, you know, and there's all sorts of issues about ethnic profiling and gender. So I'm really dismayed that we look for technological solutions as the automatic go-to. Don't worry, for those of you, I'm not anti-tech. So I think that's one problem. And the other problem is a conflation of technology and innovation. I don't know if you've who's seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but you know, Dick Van Dyke's character is always inventing things that really don't need, as like this hair cutting machine. Anyway, there's in institutions I've worked in the UK, there's a conflation of technology and innovation, and it has this sort of, it makes it just inevitable that you have to use technology to be keeping ahead in teaching and learning and in assessment, and that those who don't have no imagination. You know, I once questioned something from a learning technologist, and I know there's learning technologists here, and believe me, learning technologists are some of my best friends, but this one wasn't, because when I questioned him, he said, "Oh, your problem, Jan, is that you're not an innovator like me." Honestly, I was so angry. Anyway, but the problem is that, you know, and is anyone else here sick of being forced to use solutions to problems that you don't have? Because that's what happens in the places I've been working. So that's just another thought to keep there. And I'm very aware that I'm starting to sound anti-tech. And I discovered this book quite by accident when I was just looking for something. And it's about the Luddites, and we associate the Luddites with being anti-tech. And in the introduction to this, there's a really lovely thing that explains that actually what the Luddites were opposed to were two things. It wasn't the technology, even though I know they went and smashed it up. But firstly, it was the working conditions. And if we think about the working conditions of assessment in higher education, that is such a big issue of social justice. And the second thing that they were opposed to was the product. It was that the product, in their view, was not of the quality and of the usefulness of what they could produce through other means. So when I criticise Turnitin, which I will do till you just have to bound me up and stop me, the problem is when I look at this as a product and what it produces in terms of our understanding of academic integrity, I think it's ugly and unhelpful, because it breaches that understanding that academic work is about engaging with the minds of others, and picking up also the point in the introduction that we have the professional responsibility to nurture students in that academic craft. We cannot hive that off to somebody just studying originality reports. What it means to engage with the minds of others and to do it ethically is a core part of the academic job of us as teachers. And that is why I object to these sorts of things. And there are many other more useful things available. So obviously I've now strayed into academic integrity. So I'm going to start here with one thought and then develop on. We know from the research on assessment that students learn better in low stakes environments. But there is an assumption that high stakes environments do more to ensure academic integrity. Now, I think we could challenge that assumption, and I would. But what I'm trying to do here is just pointing out this thing. What we have here is a sense of, do we foreground learning or do we foreground integrity? Now, I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that there is a learning integrity binary here, and I'm not saying that there is a trade-off. What I'm saying is that in current practices, we do make choices. When I hear people say we have to have an exam because we know students can't cheat, I want them to be honest about the fact that they are foregrounding a high stakes form of assessment, knowing that the research has established that low stakes would lead to better learning. So they need to be honest and acknowledge a choice that is made. Now, as I said, I don't accept the assumption on which that is made, but one of the many distressing things I've been hearing in the ChatGPT world is, oh, well, we all have to go back to exams because it's the only way to ensure the students aren't cheating. We have loads of research evidence that there's cheating in exams. No one wants to hear it because that's been like a safety blanket for many professional bodies, amongst others, that we can ensure exams. But what we need to do is at least be honest about our assumptions and about where they fit in the research evidence, and also about trade-offs if we're choosing to make them. Because it strikes me as really strange if you think of it in that way. Wouldn't you choose the good learning option still? You know, that's what I want to say to people. Even if you're right about exams, why don't you choose the good learning option? And in my view, the conflation of poor referencing skills with plagiarism plagiarism as the deliberate intention to deceive has been disastrous for academic integrity, academic writing, and authentic assessment. There may be, it's awful when you start to get these indicators of how old you are. It may not, I might be maybe one, maybe two, I don't know, in the room who remember when we didn't have Turnitin. Remember when we used to approach academic writing differently. It did happen. We can imagine that world. It existed. It's not some great golden age, but it's a possibility. And what worries me is if you look at this as a sort of generic sense of some marking criteria, things that we might ask for an essay or a presentation. Why is there only one of those that we criminalise if the students can't do it? Why is there only one of those where there gets, at least in the UK, there's the infamous Freshers' Week warning, the plagiarism one. Remember, you get caught, you'll get punished, and you'll be in trouble, and you'll be listed down as a cheat. There's only one that we do that to. Why don't we say to them, you know, if you don't do critical analysis, we're going to come and get you, and you'll be in trouble, and you'll be on a list somewhere. We don't do that. All of this stuff, all of this hyperbole about cheating and plagiarism, we know most of the time. These are people who don't know how to reference properly, and it's not something perhaps taught. And I just think this is a terrible, wrong road we've come down. And I think part of reimagining is to think, could we go back and start again, not just add more on top of what we do all the time, because that's what's making academic life unbearable. We're always adding more innovations. Let's take some away and go back and then think up again. Declutter. So this leads me to my next section, which is, again, I see these as all interrelated, because what I was just talking there about good referencing and engaging with the minds of others is all about what we should see as the nature of achievement in higher education. What is it that our students are hoping to achieve? What is it that we're trying to nurture in them? And how do we do that in the best possible way? And how can assessment help us do that? So the starting place for me is always, why do we assess? And there's many possible answers to this, but the one overall one I want to give you is that we assess for that time and place when there is no assessment. We are assessing for the future. So when we are assessing our law students, we are assessing for that time when they're sitting in an office talking to a client, and we're hoping they're doing that with integrity and kindness and care and knowledge. And there is no Turnitin in the corner of the room. There is no proctoring software. That's why we're assessing. We're assessing for that time when there is no assessment. And the same with doctors, the same with teachers. You know, we're assessing our teachers so that they can be in the classrooms of your children and grandchildren, and you can have some faith in the fact that they're doing that in an ethical and kindly and informed way. So what I'm really talking about, I hope you can see, is that assessment for me is all about the intertwined nature of our lives together. And I know that seems quite a bold statement, but I want to make that statement and then say, let's take that down to everyday practices. But as was mentioned, my work's based in critical theory. And one of the best summaries of what Frankfurt School critical theory means for me is this quote from Axel Honneth. We know what is just by that which allows the individual member of our society to realise his or her own life's objectives in cooperation with others and with the greatest possible autonomy. And just look at that fabulous paradox. Cooperation with others and the greatest possible autonomy. That's why I love critical theory, because it can deal with that sort of paradox. And that's what we're trying to do, it seems to me, when we sense about, you know, what is it to achieve? What is it to achieve in a particular subject area as a graduate, as someone then who moves to take their place in society, and so on. And sorry, I just couldn't help it. I picked up a postcard of Galway yesterday and it had a black swan on it. So this picture is taken from Galway Harbour. I'm sorry, I'm just off on a little tangent here, but some of you remember this, when the black swan turned up? Yeah, you see, I'm Australian. For me as Australian, I imagined a swan, it's black. Europeans, they imagined a swan, it's white. This is what imagining differently is about. It's about making sure that black swan can visit Galway. There we are. I thought that was quite good. Anyway, so staying with this thing of why we assess, I've given a very big, if you like, philosophical view. David Bound gives a fairly good practical, and I think this is helpful. We can assess for certification, for learning, and for future learning, which he calls sustainable development. And these are different, and it's legitimate that the nature of assessment will change within them. But much as I agree with what he said, I want to come back to this idea of this interlinked phase. And one of the criticisms I would have of this is that it's very individualised. So there's no, it's not explicitly socially situated. And it does remind me a little bit of the way when early years of higher education pedagogy tended to be very individualised, looked at approaches to learning, you know, deep and surface, whereas now we look much more to social practices and to learning in that way. So I think that these three forms of assessment, it's a helpful guide for thinking about what we're doing at different points. But I would say I'd like to see it in a more socialised way, and also as the social context and the interlinked nature expressed. But there's something else I want to point out about this, because this is probably Dave Bowden, very big name, and you know we all follow these three. But none of these require a grade. None of these require a 65%. You can do them all without a grade. So the grade and assessment, that's something we have to reimagine. And park that thought, and I shall come back to it. But look at these learning outcomes. I used to, when I first started educational research, I was very against learning outcomes because I thought they were prescriptive. And I think there was a sense that's how they were used early on. You know, it's very much, you know, and like in the same way, constructive alignment can be used in a really prescriptive way. But actually, when John Biggs came up with the idea, he was a radical. He was a radical telling the University of Hong Kong, you're doing it wrong, folks. Think about it differently, imagine it differently, look at this. And I think we have to recapture that sense in a way. But I have come to understand that learning outcomes, I do think, do have a usefulness, understood in certain ways. So I think these are fairly good ones. So the student will be able to critically analyse research methods literature, explain the difference between nuclear fusion and nuclear fission, analyse the representation and significance of gender in A Midsummer Night's Dream, successfully undertake an invasive biopsy procedure and demonstrate critical understanding of contemporary debates in Scottish literature. I think they use all the right verbs and all of that we're told to use, but there is no how much. And I want you to think back to the learning outcomes for your programs and modules or courses. The way we frame learning outcomes, there is no how much. So why do we have all of this how muchness taking up our time and space? So if we think about marking criteria, the basic purpose of a marking criteria should be to help us decide, has the learning outcome been met? So it should be understanding that border between achieved and not achieved. So in the case of this one, to successfully undertake an invasive biopsy procedure, the marking criteria, and you know, forgive me, this clearly isn't my area, but they might be something like obtain a full sample, ensure no cross-contamination, maintain patient well-being. But there is no how much. It's not good enough to say, well, I only had a bit of cross-contamination, so can I have a B for that? Maybe a C, but you know, it was only a bit. That doesn't make any sense. It's illogical at the most fundamental level, both in just the grammar of the learning outcome and in the intention. It makes no sense. And yet, how muchness has come to dominate the way we assess, and our student expectations of assessment and our student expectations of achievement. And part of my argument about academic integrity is let's not just be at this end. How do we stop people, you know, wanting to do the wrong thing? Let's go back to understanding the nature of the task. If that's understood well, the incentive to do wrong things is much reduced. Students think that their worth is summed up by an A or a first-class degree. And while that is the case, there's always going to be an incentive for some people to take the paths they shouldn't take. But if students understood achievement in terms of genuinely being able to perform a task, have some knowledge, think about literature, any of these things, which enhances the world of others as well as themselves, the reason to go down any other path other than to act with integrity is much reduced. So this whole idea, and I know the grading scale, that's very North American. You probably don't go down to that sort of level of detail. But when you look at it, you just think really, it's quite silly, 87.4%. I mean, honestly. So, and there's a lot of myths and history here. And I've started reading about ungrading and I can't quite get to the bottom. There's lots of different stories about how this differentiation started. But some of the myths are that it provides incentives. Well, it doesn't. It only provides an incentive if we've misunderstood the nature of the task, doesn't it? Because it only provides an incentive if the incentive is all to get a high grade, whereas the incentive is to conduct that biopsy without harming the patient. That's what we should be thinking of, is what we want to achieve. And people say, well, it gives feedback. A number is an empty signifier of achievement. It only gives feedback if we have a really robust sense of what that number means. And in my view, the reality is that we have been drawn into this idea of differentiation because we're trying to replicate a competitive grading system. We know our professional standards tell us that we should be doing criterion-based marking. And yet the world around us wants everyone ranked. The kids who've come straight from school have come from an education system that ranked them. You had to get ranked. You had to get marks good enough to get into university, which means you had to do better than somebody else. And we're doing all of this, and we have students, at least in the UK, they are told at school, you have to learn this way, so you get the marks to go to university. They go to university, and we say, oh, we don't want that. You've been learning the whole wrong way. We want critical thinking. You've just been doing exam prep. And so they're told that. But then by the end of their degree, they're told, we've got to do all of this because this is what employers want, and we've got to make sure you're ranked in the top 50 or something, you know, because the big employer comes in and says, we'll take your top 50 graduates, please. So we have to differentiate the marks so they can do that. The employer then turns around and says to the Guardian or the Daily Mail, these universities aren't producing the graduates we want. Of course they're not, because we're producing the graduates that fit into a list where you can choose the top 50. So it's a bonkers system that does no one any good if you think about it. Well, at least if you think about it like I do, and you don't have to. This is a provocation to give you some ideas. But whenever I do this sort of talk to people, I always get messages that always say this. It's always the same. But Jan, imagine you're on the operating table and you look up and you see your surgeon. And don't you want him? And my surgeon, by the way, is always a him. I don't know how they know that. But if you look up, don't you want him to be top of his class? And I just think to these people, no, that is the last thing I want. I don't want my surgeon to be the best of a bad lot. That's all being top of the class might mean. Just might mean, well, he's not as damn awful as all the rest of them. What I want my surgeon or nurse or anaesthetist to be is someone who has met the criteria and demonstrated they can perform the task. And on top of that, I want someone with an ongoing ongoing commitment to professional development to ensure that that remains the case. And it is far more important what sort of lifelong professional learner our assessment practices have nourished than an exam mark they got 20 years ago. So I think in assessment, I see a lot of confusion. What's the relationship between learning outcomes and marking criteria? Because actually when I sit down with most academics and talk that through, it can get quite confused, and I don't think students have any idea. Who uses learning outcomes when they mark? It's meant to be what we're doing the assessment for, but do you actually ever read your learning outcomes at the time of sitting down to mark? I probably never have. But we know we have to sort of robustly justify grades and scores if we give them. I accept that. And we know we have to ensure transparency with students, and we know that just sharing learning outcomes or marking criteria is not enough. And so I think, how do we imagine our way through all this confusion? Because if you peel back our day-to-day practices, I think they are often confused. They may not be since your project, and please feel free to tell me that. But again, I am very much talking in generalities here. So to solve this confusion, the place that we often go is rubrics. And I think rubrics represent an atomization to avoid imagination. Now, please, I want to get out of here in one piece. Let me be clear what I mean by rubrics. Again, I'm old enough to remember when they first came in and were a big deal. Once we used to just have marking criteria. Now, some of you may be using the word rubric and meaning it as a marking criteria. That's not what I'm criticising. I'm criticising rubrics as they came in originally as this idea of trying to break marking criteria into more detail as to be able to justify a mark with greater so-called robustness. So the breaking it down into more and more detail and hopefully, making it more robust, making us more accountable, making it more transparent, all done for good reasons. But I think it is avoiding imagination. And I've already mentioned John Law, this beautiful book, After Method, Mess in Social Science Research. It begins with this image. And if you look at that, and this is about research, but research is evaluation, and that's what assessment is. So if you were trying to capture this and share it, how could you do that? And what Lawwood says, if this is an awful mess, then would something less messy make a mess of describing it? So if our disciplinary knowledge is complex and contested and messy, then if we tidy it up, are we always doing the right thing? Or would we be better helping students to nurture that sense of trying to deal with mess, deal with uncertainty, deal with there isn't a right answer, deal with provisionality, contestation, and so forth? And I think that there is this tug of war between the complex nature of interpersonal or disciplinary knowledge and the good practice about making everything clear and transparent. And to be clear, I am not saying we shouldn't be clear and transparent, but I'm saying the idea that reducing the mess is the best way of doing that is well-meaning, but I question it, other than when we're talking about things like the building blocks of knowledge, the building blocks of some of the competencies in the health sciences or in chemistry, knowing what the elements are, that sort of thing. But beyond that, higher education is always at this complex level. And so here's what I call a monster rubric. And I know you can't read it because I don't want to at this stage. But you see, it's just massive. And what it's trying to do is down this left-hand side, is really break everything down to be transparent. And then across, but you can't do that both ways, or it would be the sense that this is meant to make things simpler, clearer. So what they do then is they just simply have a not met, partially met, exceeded. And basically you just work out which box, and then it can all be added up by a computer, and then you've got your mark, and you can say to your student, I can defend this mark because look what produced it. But look at it in some detail. So we have there, development thesis statement support is weighted at 10%. But development of scholarly conversation is weighted at 8%. Who worked that out? I mean, how long did it take them and how did they work that out? That's not transparent. But then we go down to, we have critical thinking, content discourse, critical thinking, integration of ideas. I can't tell the difference. I wouldn't know. And I'm not being critical of these colleagues because this was a rubric developed in good faith, facing the difficulties we face with students' expectations about assessment. And those expectations are driven by a certain sense of what achievement is. That achievement is generally grade-based. But this is a dissertation in history. So I always imagine it's a dissertation on the French Revolution. And there's gunfire and smoke and intrigue and sex and big dresses and there's all sorts of stuff happening. And I want to read that about from my students' work. And yet I'm sitting there and I've got a pile of how many of these? What? The critical thinking content discourse. And it's just like, bang, put a number in a box. It's, for me, it represents everything assessment shouldn't be. And yet it's been developed with every best intention and a very student-focused attention too, I'm sure. But what we should be encouraging our students to do, even though these building blocks are important, and even though those different things of good referencing skills, critical analysis, understanding the literature, all of these matter, but at the end of the day, it's the relationship each has to the other which produces the whole picture. And shouldn't we be encouraging our students to produce a whole picture? Because that's the thing that has beauty and worth. And we're not doing that if we atomise it all, thinking that's helping our students. It's much harder to deal with this. It's much harder to understand interrelationships. But for me, that's what higher education knowledge does. And we should be sharing that with our students and helping them rather than the opposite. And we should be helping them see that achievement is producing a thing of beauty like this, or a thing of worth, like helping a patient. Maybe they've got cancer and they're frightened, they're having a biopsy. Doing that well, that's achievement. 78% is an empty signifier of achievement. They should not be how these people, they're not all young, but some of them are young. It's not how they should be seeing their self-worth as they go through into this world where we don't know what it's going to be like with AI. But I know the one thing about a world of AI is we've got to really value our human worth. And that's what we should be helping our students to do. So, and you don't have to go gradeless to move to a more holistic approaches to assessment. I know that it's not going to happen in my lifetime, is it? But, we'll move. I think we'll move on PGT courses. I think we'll move on some professional courses because, there the argument is really strong. And I know some professional bodies are already up for this. So I was at an event with people from engineering. And of course, in engineering, the bridge stays up or it falls down. That's what matters. And how do you do this, how muchness to it? But putting that aside, there are things about a holistic approach to assessment that we can do even with our current grading systems. And the first is trust. Let's not work on a basis that our students are out to cheat or that they are instrumental. If we treat our students as instrumental, of course they will be. Somebody's got to move first. It's chicken and egg. And surely maybe where the sort of the senior partner in the teaching learning relationship where it's up to us maybe to make the first move in terms of trust. And I'm not being naive here. Please don't think that. But what I'm saying is adopting all student systems that treat all students as potentially going to cheat seems to me a really inefficient way of understanding academic integrity. It would be much better to go back to the source. We should make a stand against pseudo-normative marking. We all sit in places, talk to colleagues, oh, it was a bad lot this year, so this was the best of them, so I've given it 80%. No, that's normative marking. Don't let that be okay. Don't let it be okay. I don't know whether you have it, but I know of institutions where people still come up to the exam board and they produce the bell curve of their marking. See, look, I've marked well, everybody. I have a normal distribution. Now, in a criterion-based marking system, those people should be told to go back and do the whole lot again because they've done it wrong. But it's happening. We should embrace the messiness of the whole. We can bring that into our assessment without even changing any formal rules. It's just a mindset of what our aims are and what matters. And we should resist propping up the false education as competition narrative. Certainly in the UK, we've been told for decades that if we treat education as a competitive endeavour, it will improve. Well, no one's saying it's improved. And we should see assessment as about genuine achievement. I think that's the greatest gift as teachers we can give our students, is to help nurture their sense of achievement. And even in a graded system, we can still help them to understand the genuine achievement of doing something that is personally satisfying and of help to others, and seeing that interplay. So that's not a typo. So just to close, I'm going to look a little bit at authentic assessment, which is just a silly thing of me saying I'm challenging authentic assessment. So I recently published this article because there's a lot. Authentic assessment is probably one of the big buzzwords that we have at the moment. And many of you will probably think from the things I've already said that perhaps what I'm indicating is moving to say, well, authentic assessment is the solution here. Well, yes and no. So my critique of the way authentic assessment has tended to be used in practice and in the literature up until now is that it always talks about real world tasks, which I think is problematic for several reasons. First is that the real world quickly conflates into the world of work. And while the world of work is incredibly important to well-being, it's not all there is in life. And let's not produce generations of people who think that they're meant to think that. And it portrays the real world as external, as if the students aren't in a real world. There's a real world out there. What right do we have to tell our students they're not in a real world right here now? They're struggling to pay their fees, to pay the rent. If you're in the UK, a massive cost of living crisis. They know about so-called real world problems. They've lived through COVID. You know, this is a generation who understands that. So let's not tell them there's a real world out there that they don't know and that they're not part of. And present it as something that we just accept and cannot change. So you have to conform to what that real world wants. You're not part of it, by the way. You're just in this weird place. But there's a world out there you have to conform to. And we end up just about what employers want. And employers are sending us mixed messages anyway. That's the first thing. And this is about assessment for a compliant workforce. And a compliant workforce will not solve the problems that we face as a society. And so my alternative is based on three arguments. The first is that we work from talking about the real world, the world of work, to thinking about society. So we move from the compliant workers, monetized self-worth, synonymous of graduate premium, externalized real world, rarefied, we cannot change it, to we re-embrace in society. And we make explicit some things that are perhaps implicit. So when work I did with colleagues in South Africa, there was a brilliant assessment where engineering students were looking at solutions to water poverty. Now, this is a deeply embedded social problem, but they sort of didn't have a chance to see it that way because they just did it as a technical challenge and then they were on to the next thing. So just having so-called real world tasks to me doesn't ensure the authenticity we're after. We have to take that step of connecting to what this task is actually doing and having space and room in our curriculum and assessment programs for students to contemplate, to think about these things. And you know, it also means things like, you know, Gothic literature. People think that that's not about the real world, but actually students studying that know so much about social marginalisation and exclusion. It is so socially based. So let's look at that and understand it and celebrate it and see its worth. And the next thing is to move from task performance to why a task matters. There's a lot of tasks performed in that so-called real world that aren't much worth doing. In fact, many of them are causing all the problems we're trying to fix. So we don't want students who can just do a task. We want students who have a sense of why the task matters. And that sense of why a task matters then shapes the nature of the task. So students are, you know, engineers, educated to, you know, respond to the climate emergency. It can't simply be about the demands of employers. We need students who can see that building a new industrial site where the pollution is allowed to just run off and then be mitigated by public spending, which is generally paid through the taxes and then disproportionately by the well-off, that's not a good solution, that's not understanding the task and why it matters. And similarly, we can see it in the value of small things, the connection of the climate emergency to everyday lives. So when we have those engineering students working on the design of a new plan, are they thinking about the child with asthma who just lives down the road? Or are they thinking about that child on the other side of the world they'll never meet, who also has asthma? Are they thinking about that? when they do these tasks. And as I said, with literature, so criticised as not being relevant, but actually so much oppression is carried through fiction. And we all go on our summer holidays and take a good book. We need the people understanding what messages are being carried there. And then hence we go from the status quo of this so-called real world to one of a transformative view of society. And Richter, writing about critical theory, has this beautiful term, paleonymy. I still can't say it after all this time. But it again sums up critical theory, the standing inside and outside at the same time. And for me, authentic is not to join the world that exists, but to contribute to the world that could be. This world we're imagining greater human flourishing. And so imagining otherwise, there's challenges for all of us and all of you out there. To university managers, how easy is it for assessment reform? You know, if it takes 3 years, then don't say that you've got authentic assessments. Academics, do you really believe in your assessments? Do you really believe in the assessments you're using? Students, I don't know if the students on this, but are you sending mixed messages to your teachers? Career staff, are you promoting the education as competition narrative? And professional services staff as procedure overtaken purpose? And we can then mix those up. I can't get PowerPoint to do it properly, but these aren't actually, don't have to be attached to these particular groups of people, you know. So university managers, are you promoting the education as competition narrative, and so forth? So what I'm trying to say is we're all implicated in this interconnectedness, and there are challenges for us all, and I think we could all question, and at least maybe you don't need to change practice, but come back with that stronger sense of doing it for the purposes that you believe in. And so how we respond to ChatGPT and generative AI, and how we nurture authentic assessment and academic integrity, for me, rests on values and principles that we should have attended to long before ChatGPT. The problem now is not to look at AI and that and think what the solution is. The issue is to go back to basics about why we assess and think, was there a different path? Imagine the different path we could have taken. Imagine the decolonial path. Imagine the path where we didn't just say all of that doesn't matter, and we just went doggedly down this. Imagine that different path. So imagine otherwise, ensure there's time and space for impossible thoughts, because impossible thoughts are the really good bit of academic life. And academic work is the engagement with the minds of others. And that needs to be at the heart and centre of how we think about academic integrity, because it's been completely lost in the ways we've been socialised to think about academic integrity, and it needs to come back. Academic work is always engagement with the minds of others, with dignity and with courtesy and with kindness, but that's what makes it all really worth doing. And that's me.
Thank you. Yeah, can you stay with me here?
Yep.
Because we just thanks a million. That was wonderful. You really gave us a lot to think about. I have a few questions, and but I'll put it out to the floor here, and also we'll ask colleagues online. Now, Kevin, I can't actually see who's online, but you can see the. Yeah. Okay, great. I see a little message popping up here. Take that off. Can somebody live ask online? It's only, okay, it's only messaging. All right, thanks. Is there any questions here in the room? Anybody? Yes, Eleanor.
Show you this.
Oh yeah, it's fine.
For our like colleagues who are in water now.
Thanks very much, and I really enjoyed it. It was provoking, and I think you have a bit of a black and white view on something like the bridge can fall down or the bridge will stand up, but maybe the bridge can crack and deteriorate. So I think my question is, I think with social sciences and even teaching and learning education, we use all this language like authentic assessment or academic integrity, and our students don't understand the meaning of it. And I think a lot of teachers don't understand the meaning of it. We might have an impression or a feeling of it. So I think a lot of problem I have is the vocabulary, and also a lot of things you talk about in the social science aspects brings into the classroom. I feel unprepared to deal with the social aspect. You know, I'm trying to look at a wider society or how people learn. We're bringing in very quite emotive things. You're saying, "Oh, I'm going to make them." I do nurture them, and I know when I get to know them, I treat them as a whole, and will bend over backwards to help them in lots of different ways. You won't highlight them alternative. You'll deal with it a different way. So all those things you do in a room where you know them. So I imagine in a bigger university where you might have 100 in a classroom, there's a whole different issue with alternative. But we use it as a tool. We definitely don't use it as a catching. And I still use the phrase for referencing. So I think, I know it's a bit of a polemic to get us thinking, but I think a little bit is part of the problem is the social sciences and the teaching theory going back to us saying, oh, the trend is authentic assessment. The trend is, you know, it was surface learning, deep learning. So it almost teaches practical. So when we try and theorise it, I think it's hard to then think, how does that apply in my classroom, in my setting? So I know you're giving us lots more words to think about, but I think, again, it's knowing in your own classroom you've got your own autonomy as a teacher, and if something magical happens and you do give them a grade, and or do you want to go back to a sort of a pass fail, you know, get rid of grades completely? So there's quite a lot of things there. I think we all need to maybe discuss. So maybe I'm going down a mind sort of funnel, but I think some of the things you're saying is, you know, you've got your own thoughts on it, and I think maybe other people have different opinions. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And honestly, social sciences with teaching and learning, the biggest problem you have is I honestly think sometimes you're all talking to yourselves, and the vocabulary stops. Me talking to my students about it, or me talking to other lecturers who maybe have not done a teaching course in a while, and I'm throwing up, you know, UDL, EGI, and you know, all these things. You know, what's the latest thing, you know, we're applying for? And I think part of that is the problem of the terminology and the communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of actually what I meant to say, but obviously didn't say it well, is that, you know, that to me, that's the problem with authentic assessment. It's just this buzzword. And everyone talks about it and we're told to do it. But actually, let's just peel back and think, what does it really mean? Same with achievement. Well, what does it really mean that our students are trying to do? They're trying to learn something and learn it well, be able to do things. And let's just peel it back to that. Let's talk to them in that language. I completely agree with you. It's looking behind the buzzwords of the education is really what I'm trying to say. And I think a lot of the terms we use, the students don't understand. We have to realise that. And we justify what we do by, well, they're the learning outcomes. But, you know, the students haven't done yet the PG CAP in how to write learning outcome. But then, so I completely agree with you. I think about the black and white. I think if the bridge is cracked, I still don't want my children in a bus going over it because that might be the day it breaks. You know, I do think there is I think the point about how we phrase learning outcomes is that they are not phrased for differentiation. Now, I'm quite happy for people to say, but I want to add differentiation. I'm just saying, I want you to look at these and start from the point that it is not inevitable that we have differentiation. So that's my challenge. It's not you're all to do what I say. It's I'm saying, please look at that and think, is there another option here? And the same about the social setting. I agree. But I think this is part of one of the problems. I think our university life has become too crowded for us and for students, too busy. And the time to understand the reason for doing something is going. So as I say, these fabulous engineering students in South Africa doing a project that I think we would look at as exemplary. You know, there's a water crisis, there's water poverty, deep social issues there. These are engineers trying to work out practical ways to ensure water gets to people who need it to survive. And that's good. But if they don't have time to make those connections about the social importance, about the fact that this isn't just, you know, who can come out with the cleverest way of changing the path of water. If they don't actually understand that there are children dying from poverty, And when they go out into the workplace and then there's maybe a different challenge, they have to be able to understand it in terms of why it matters. I just think that for me, that applies in every single discipline we do. Even in pure maths, although I struggle quite to find the link, but one day I will work it out. But so I think that idea is true. So I'm sorry if it seemed about jargon. I was trying to actually say let's go behind it and strip it away. And definitely it's not, this is a provocation. But I think some of my points, though, I would stand by them. I would stand by the thing about having a generation or generations of people who think achievement is summed up by a letter or a grade. As to turn it in as a tool, yeah, I think you could do it better, save the money and have more learning development advisors or something like that. I think there's better ways, because I think the logic of turn it in, the idea of that originality score, the idea that you highlight when the text is somebody else's, really ruins students understanding that essential point that academic work is about the engagement with the minds of others. There's nothing wrong with having lots of engagement with the minds of others. So that's my philosophical and practical point. But I know a lot of people use it and use it very well. I completely accept that.
And Marilla, thank you.
Hi,
Yeah,
thank you. I'd like to build up my
Marilla?
point, actually. So I'm Marilla Keating, BSc Quality for Industry here in ATU, Galway Mayo. And myself and my colleagues, we teach adult learners in the evening. So they're working and then they come to us in the evening. And, you know, your point on trusting the students is good. So I'd like to just build on that is, my opinion is that if we can teach them the confidence, you know, so you're saying about trust, so they would trust their own skills. So if we can teach them confidence and help them to build self-confidence that their approach is something we want to develop. So if they know the answers, they can tell us. If they don't know the answers, to have the confidence to go and find out, to be resourceful. So I think that's what we're trying to teach them, not to write down the answer to the question, but just to say, hey, I don't know, but this is the approach I would take, and I would go and search for it this way. I mean, it's all about, you know, looking for answers here with quality systems, you know. So anyway, just confidence is the word you didn't mention, and I think that that's a key point.
Absolutely, yeah, that's that self, that belief in self. You know, that surely is what we want our graduates to leave with. All sorts of graduates, yeah. Most of my students are mature in work people too, so I completely agree, and that's another good word to add.
And we have Rita. You'll have to pass it back. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, thank you, Jan. You absolutely spoke to my heart in everything you said around assessment. My area is early childhood education and care. So when I teach in Galway and in Mayo, and when we look at assessment for our students, we want to prepare them for practice, not for, it's important that they have academic writing skills and all of that, but the role that they take when they go out into practice is so important for young children's lives. And at the very beginning of their educational journey, that we need our students to be fit for practice. So the kind of assessment that we do is things like setting up play activities, learning stories, winter out on the trail in Castlebar, where we have children and families in, and our students are working, are playing with the children, and all of this forms part of their assessment. So I suppose when you said about trusting students, in my own research, I looked at the educator's image of the child as a learner, the kind of basis that your image of the child is where teaching begins. That if you see the child as competent, you create learning environments for them to be competent. But I think it's the very same thing across all education. For adults or mature students, our image of the student is where our pedagogical approach begins, believing and trusting in them, and understanding that teaching and learning is a reciprocal process, that we learn so much from our students as they learn from us, and that we research together. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you for saying it. I mean, that beautifully sums it up. May I say, I think for people like me who look at higher education pedagogy, we have a lot to learn from early years. specialists, because there's a lot that's done in early years education that we shouldn't be losing as people go through and you know, through the education system. And one of this is forgiving assessment systems. You know, it's okay to make mistakes, and it sort of comes back to confidence. You gain confidence by making a mistake, working through it, being able to do it again. But a lot of our assessment systems predicate on the idea that get it right the first time. So when I look at, think of the students that really stay in your heart. Aren't they the ones that struggled and got there? And aren't they the ones that you think, yeah, they'll do well. They'll do well because they've worked at it and they've got it and they've built it, not because it came easy or because it came by accident, but because they worked at it. And I think that one of the problems with the way because we're so obsessed with grades, and the reason I mentioned grades, I didn't can I just say so it's the time we spend. I would at least like people to do a time and motion study to say the amount of time to differentiate grades, then to moderate that. What if you took all that away and you spent maybe doing feedback in grades? I mean, I know that you're just on the back of a great project, so I haven't come here to criticise your thing. I'm talking about generally though, ideas that you could bring in now to take forward the work you've already done. But I think one of them would be that idea of thinking about forgiving assessment systems and thinking about where you can find the space and the time to do everything you want. That's what I said. Let's admit when we make choices. When we make a choice, and I know it might feel like a choice, but when the university makes a choice to have highly differentiated grades, you make a commitment to a certain amount of time and labour. Now, that's a choice. And I'm saying maybe rethink that choice or have a strong rationale for the choice. That's fine, but don't pretend it's not a choice. Don't pretend it's inevitable and that we have no agency in the choices that we make as the most highly educated professions in the world, surely. You know, you should be able to take and not. And I suppose the one thing about this project, and I know the broader project that the QQI is doing, is about giving that sense of agency and change out to academics. And I think you should really be so grateful to have that, because certainly if I look at the UK, I don't see that there. And that's a real difference.
I think things like maybe there's the things outside about we are looking into the sort of new teaching and learning strategy. But for instance, one thing like modularization, semesterization, maybe should just go. But we all got made to do it 10 years ago. And you know, so and then there's the whole idea of the first year being completely gradeless. Yeah. So but they make it too radical for them to take on.
Well, I don't
know.
You know,
I put 12 hurdles in front of my engineering student instead of 6 after modularization, semesterization. And then obviously more hurdles for the students who don't like exams. We did go 100% CA, but you give a lot of assessment. So I'm sure we're all going to say we over-assess. And then basically maybe get rid of first year being a grade, get into second year automatically. But you get feedback. Yeah. Again, you need the evidence though. I know when it wakes up, I need to have some evidence, something I made up to justify my number and to say I did a discussion, I did this activity, here's the evidence I did it, this is the mark. So some things make you do things, sort of reverse engineering.
Oh yeah, we all work in imperfect systems, and modularisation obviously came to the UK quite some time ago. So now they're at the point where they're going back the other way, and it's all about programs, you know. And so awful, you don't want to hear me say that, do you? But you know, in 10 years' time, it'll be a great idea. Let's all go back to programs. So all of these things are imperfect, and we work in imperfect systems. And what I'm trying to say is let's look for those little fissures where we can make a difference and at least understand where choices have been made. They might be choices we didn't make, but let's understand them and not think that they're inevitable.
The system does do that. When I know Michael said integrated assessment, the point is we're all delivering individual modules. Try your best to work with your program team. I could turn up in September and get 2 new modules. So most of you think is I'm just getting through my semester. So you know the structure doesn't always help you. So modularisation, specialisation, individual lectures, just doing your module, all those things management could look at to help you be more autonomous and have more agency. Say, I'm happy this student has met these learning outcomes, pass them on. Pass whatever.
Thanks, Eleanor. We're
One more.
one more question, and then is there a question online, Kevin?
Hi.
In the whole world, I actually said get rid of modularisation.
Okay.
Thanks, Eleanor. So,
Hi, Jan. Flohé McGrath from ATU Sligo. I just want to say it's like a breath of fresh air after listening to your talk. I just think that each and every year we're just so focused on assessing to an outcome, assessing to a grade, justification for our grade, external examiner process, which exactly goes again and validation of our grade. And then we're probably being challenged as to, can you pixelate it even further and tell me why I didn't get the 87 and I got an 83, you know, or whatever. So I think what I would take from all of this is simply some things I do anyway, which is just step back after every semester and say what worked, what didn't work. Why did I do that? Can I now do it differently? And the only problem I would see is sometimes in our modular system and in our, you know, when we have our learning outcomes, we now have grade books and we can't change, you know, maybe from a 30% CA to a, you know, 20% CA and a 10% for discussion. You know, you're nearly automatically, well, what's your mark for this one? It's in a grade book, put it in. And I think sometimes we need to stop all of this pixelating of our CA and our final exam. The final exam, yeah, you know what you're going to give, but your CA should be a place where you can just reimagine, like what you've said, reimagine where we're going, give ourselves the time and space, and sometimes assess less.
That you said was the purpose of this module. And think how much of what you do doesn't relate to what they're saying. So there might, of course, there's probably subjects and times and moments where maybe a differentiated grade is worth doing. But in terms of research evidence, if you go beyond sort of about 4 different differentiations, no one's ever come up with evidence that you can in any sense prove the accuracy and the efficacy of those grades. So that's my issue. You know, there's a research base here. This isn't just, oh, wouldn't it be nice? There's a research base, and I can't understand why universities won't use educational research to inform their decisions. You know, so again, when they build that new building, I hope they're using engineering research. But why, when we have all these students, we don't use educational research? It won't give us an answer, but it will inform the decisions that we can make. Obviously, I speak from the self-interest of a Department of Educational Research, but it is a bit of a frustration.
very good. Thanks, Jan. Is there any other final question from this group? No. I just have just a short question and a couple of comments. You certainly triggered a lot of debate, and I'm interested in you know, the comments you made around going back to basics, understanding why do we assess, and you also mentioned around learning outcomes that there's no how much, and also in relation to have we thought enough about criteria and have we looked at their ability to actually do the task and have they demonstrated that. And I'm thinking we've been exploring in the last couple of years around competency-based assessment, and certainly it's come up in various different projects. And your experience of that in relation to competency-based assessment and removing the marks and aligning. So when we look at the learning outcomes or we look at the programme, and we look at the competencies, and you talked about the task and knowing
suppose it's why the task matters is more important. So should we, and we talk about going back to basics, should we be rethinking the whole learning outcomes model, and should we be designing our programs based on the competencies that are required to perform the task and do the job? Just your view on that.
In the sector I come from, competencies is a very contested word. And is it here too? Yes. As well. So I'm very nervous what I'm about to say. So I think I would need to think about whether I would be comfortable with the word competencies, at least as it's been used in the past, because sometimes I think it has taken us away from knowledge. And I do think technological universities, as much as any other, you know, a lot of what we do, we shouldn't downplay that sense of this is about knowledge and bodies of knowledge, and that there are things to learn about the body of knowledge in chemistry or in engineering or in physiotherapy. So it's a sort of a yes/no. I think that we could take some of that, but maybe put a modern twist on it. You know, we could go back there and look at that and say, well, why didn't we like competencies based? But that doesn't mean we had to go down this path. That's what I'm saying. There were always paths that we made choices, or we didn't always make them. I know that people way above us made them. Sometimes, but I don't think they always did make them. I sometimes think they wandered down them, and they need our help to say, you know what, you could go back to the start. Let's look at competencies. Maybe what were the debates there? But is there now a third alternative? You know, that you know, overcomes why people were nervous about that it was downplaying some of the important aspects of higher education, but take what was good about it, which is the idea that, you know, you do it or you don't. This is why, I mean, actually in medicine they are gradeless, at least in the UK. You don't want to be lying there looking at your surgeon who's a man and saying, what grade did you get? What point do you get up and walk out? If they say 68, do you say? You say you wait until you get the surgeon who comes in and say they got 75? You know, it just, what a waste of time that would be.
Thank you, Jan. So thanks very much. That was wonderful. It certainly got us all thinking. And we will have further chats out at coffee.
To it.
Yeah. So thank you. So now,
Everyone.
So next up, just before the coffee break, we have one more short session, and I'm delighted to introduce the Teaching and Learning Technology team from the Teaching and Learning Centre here in Galway, Mayo, who are going to look at bite-sized introduction to ChatGPT. And we've been doing a lot of work in this space and collaborating together in Tutors. So Dr. Sean Daffy and Orla Scahill, is it both? Is Kevin coming? Oh,
Kevin's busy.
Kevin is busy running the show here.
But he's doing everything. Yeah.
So I'll hand it over to you. So
Thank
thanks
you.
very much.
Thanks, Karina. Find our Sure. This is just a very quick introduction and demo to ChatGPT. We've all heard about it and what it can do. So we just want to talk a little about some of its capabilities. Just give you a little taste of what it can do, because we're developing some further inputs for this. If it ignites some curiosity, come join us and we'll explore this together and try and figure out what's the best way we can use it or not, and when it is appropriate or not to use in teaching and learning. So this is the riddle that ChatGPT created for itself.
Read it there.
Yeah.
In a menacing voice.
Menacing. It is. Do you want to do? You do the menacing. You do menacing.
I possess knowledge vast beyond measure, with endless possibilities to treasure. Intrigue and fear, a potent blend, as I redefine how assessments transcend. A tool of potential, I disrupt the norm, unlocking new ways to inform. Higher education ponders my might, for I hold the future within my bites. Minutes.
It's very creative. It was written by ChatGPT itself, of course. Of course, we didn't do it. Okay, it did. It wrote it itself. But we won't go into this too much because it's quite, you could talk about for ages what it does, but it's a large language model or an LLM. And it's created by a company called OpenAI that's capable of generating human-like responses to natural language inputs. So you don't have to use a computer coding language. You just put in the, as you'd say it, and it will spout something back that'll also sound like it was generated by a human, not a machine. It thinks what's closest. So it uses algorithms, machine learning, and huge data sets. But the data sets end in September 2021. So you'll notice that when we get it. I was up with Blahin in Sligo, and we got it to generate safety statements for a hair salon, which was, I think, an assessment you had one students do, and ChatGPT was just generating it, but it was telling everyone to social distance and wear masks in the salon. So it's out of date, but it's powerful. And the LLM is essentially, I'm not going to talk about this too much, but this is the main point. They set this thing loose, this machine program, on a data set of about 5 trillion words. So that were available on the internet. Now, they were freely available, so it didn't have access to journals that were behind paywalls. Okay, first off, so it doesn't have that information. It just had information for what's freely available. They selected 5 trillion. So if I was to speak at about 100 words per minute, which maybe I'm doing right now, I would be here for 10,000 years. That's how many texts it's done. But what it was told to do, it is pre-trained. They didn't say, look for this, look for that. They just let it loose and said, look for patterns, speech patterns. It's a language model. It's not an information model. It's not a truth model. It's a language model. They said, this is how humans use language. Have a look at that. And if we ask you to do something, give something that would sound like a human back. That's all it does. It has no truth or veracity meter. Okay? It's not looking to find facts. It's not looking to analyze or make judgments. It's looking to give you back a response that it thinks a human would give back based on 5 trillion words it has looked at and spotted patterns on. Okay, and here's the interesting thing. If we're talking about big numbers that are impressive, it had over 100 million users in 2 months. It's the most rapidly adopted computer application ever invented. It now has, and it's probably more, 1 billion visitors per month. Okay, so all our students are using it. Everyone is using it. Like 1 billion visitors a month. I mean, how many people? 7. Okay. But it sounds great and technical. We wouldn't be here discussing it if it was just a language model. The real problem is with AI in general is it makes us question other things like what is real. We have a Pope in a puffer jacket. That image is not real. It just hit that zeitgeist sweet spot and went around the internet. And of course, what is creative? This is a photography award that a photographer won, but it was actually created by AI, with the person just saying, give me an image with this, that, and the other. He didn't take this. He got the award and then he handed it back, but he said, just as photography replaced painting and reproduction of reality, AI will replace photography. So what is real and what is creative? It makes us question that at a basic level. But I think we're going to go straight and just show you what it does. So, Orla, do you want to?
So yeah, we're going to put 2 hats on, and I'm not going to really cast judgment. I'm going to just put a teacher's hat on and show how a teacher might use this. I'm not going to comment on the truthfulness of the content that comes back or the usefulness of it. Just want to show you what it can do. And then Sean puts the student hat on afterwards. We need to find ChatGPT here now. Where's the website? This for a second.
You might have to use Edge.
Hang on.
Did you sign in on Edge, Kevin, or is it Chrome?
Sorry.
I saw
I'm just gonna get my notes. So I'm just gonna jump over here now. So this is ChatGPT. We're gonna go there in a second. I just need to copy some notes. So I just I took a little look around to see were there universities promoting or suggesting use of ChatGPT as a teacher. And so I found one example over in the University of Pretoria. And they have a big table of content and things that they were suggesting that a teacher might use it in their day-to-day life. So rather than jumping straight to the concept of maybe students cheating in assessments and all that, let's just see about it as a teacher's tool, first off. So I'm going to use that as a basis. I'm going to copy some of these questions to save time. I'm just going to pop them in straight away. It's ChatGPT. So my first one, bearing in mind, it's been a very, very long time since I did any form of maths or calculus. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to provide me 2 lesson plans covering the understanding of integration from first principles in a first-year university maths course. And I'm going to give it a little bit more context and ask that these sessions last 45 minutes each, and this should include an introductory activity, information input, and a student task. So certainly ChatGPT says, and away it goes. So it's going to create me lesson plans. 2 lesson plans have been built on the fly. And it's going to be hard to see this. We'll let it complete the job. That took a few seconds to do. I've got 2 lesson plans with materials and timing suggestions and so on. Okay, so just make that a little bit clearer. I'm going to ask it, can you put that into a table for me? Okay, so let's just kind of see what it came up with. So lesson 1, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, a student task to do some discussions, a conclusion. Lesson plan 2 is 45 minutes, some of the materials needed, different steps. I'm not going to comment on what the actual contents are, but if you're a maths lecturer, it may make sense to you. So there's our table, and there's our lesson plans with what we need and the different activities and how long they're going to take. So we're going to go and take a little step further with this and kind of maybe do everything slightly, sorry. Back to my notes. Oh, I'm here, sorry. So I'm going to ask it, what will I ask? I put on the table. I'm going to start reverse engineering this now because some interesting discussions and questions came up a minute ago. And let's say, can you write 4 learning outcomes that capture the lesson plan above? So let's go backwards. So by the end of the lesson, students will be able to define integration from first principles. They will be able to complete the task, be able to approximate the area under a curve. At the end of the lesson, students will be able to compare and contrast the accuracy and limitations of approximating areas using rectangles and Riemann sums and apply these concepts to solve integration problems. All sounds very, very nice. Nice little correct words are being used. So we'll go another step further. And I'm going to ask it to give me some questions so I can quiz these students on this stuff. And I'm going to be a little bit more specific about the type of questions that I want as well. So, little editing here. So I'm going to get 6 multiple choice now. I know the multiple choice, not a great one, but let's give it a go. I get 6 multiple choices, and I'm going to ask ChatGPT to categorize them according to Bloom's taxonomy, and also tell me what the correct answer is, because I won't have a clue. So sure, here's some 6 multiple choices. So straight away, it's pumping out. So for application and applying, for analysis and analyzing, synthesis, creating. I'm getting a question for each of these, which all ties into Bloom's taxonomy. And the last one, just to put the nail in the coffin, would be, can you associate each of those with my learning outcomes? And is it there yet? Not. It did a little bit better earlier. It mentioned each question specifically. So if I probably put a bit more specific, it'll go and tell me which multiple choice maps exactly with my learning outcome and how it maps to Bloom's taxonomy. So I won't say any more about it, but that's what I can do as a teacher.
Okay, so I'm the student, and we had a lovely learning outcome from, and I think it was analyze the representation and significance of gender in the Midsummer's Night Dream. And let's say that learning outcome is going to be assessed via an essay, very likely. Let's do it right now. Traditional gender roles, paragraph, subversion of gender norms, gender power dynamics, gender fluidity and transformations, same-sex attraction. It should give me a conclusion. It's still generating. Comedy and gender. Overall, Midsummer Night Dream portrays a gender as a multifaceted construct, challenging traditional norms and exploring the complex desires of power, blah, 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 blah. But there's no quotes from the text. And my lecture wants quotes from the text. So let's do that. Traditional gender roles. I would have father, but my eyes, so Hermia, actress one, scene one, blah, 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 you get the point. Now, I need references is the next thing. So I'll copy and paste them in. Now, they may or may not be correct. My Shakespeare, I have a degree in English, but I don't know. But let's ask for some references. I'm going to ask for references first now. It may not, but there's ways around it. Can you references for this? Hang on. Now, it won't give me references. Okay, I apologize, blah, 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 but I'm going to ask it for a reading list. So here's a reading list. Shakespeare and Gender, History by Deborah E. Baker. Shakespeare's Feminine and Philippa Barry. Sexual Politics of Shakespeare by Penny Gray. Now, here's the thing. I'm trying to think now and see. These are all real people, but I guarantee you at least one or two of those articles are not real. So it was given me earlier. I just tried this while we were doing the thing, and it gave me a reference on gender and power in Shakespeare by, I forget who it was. It was the guy who did Renaissance self-fashioning. The name is gone from me now, that book. And I said, oh, that's not his bag at all. The article didn't exist. It's like that. But you get an idea of the power of it, you know? Yeah. You get a totally original, generative answer. Yeah. No. It's just consulting text from 2001. It does that. And by the way, this is the free version.
So, as a student, I can't find out what my lecturer has used this for. Or not?
No.
Okay, good. That's all.
Yeah. But also it's vice versa. As a lecturer, we can, unless we get, we've had a couple of students recently who handed out. I've been talking to some lecturers in some courses, and we've had, in one course, there were 3 students, and there was the telltale. Number one, the lecture was deeply sus. They reckoned about 70% of what was coming in was generative, but it had the telltale dodgy references. That's the only way you can tell currently. They gave references that didn't exist. Yeah. Yeah. It probably will be. Now, it probably, a lot of that, apart from some of the, although the quotations, I'd swear the quotations would be right in that. The direct quotations, the references won't be. AI to generate stuff and it's dodgy, and then we're asking it to say, did you create this? ChatGPT, it has no veracity meter in its algorithm. It's not about the truth. It's about generating text that looks like it was made by a human based on the texts that are there. But anyway, that's what the students can do, and the teachers. Shall we go on?
I think it's before, I think we're happy to talk about it because we're just going to.
Yeah, sorry, Jen.
The question I wanted to ask is, I think this thing about references
Yeah.
is really interesting, and I think that's where academics should be thinking about what this does. But as you were saying, it's all, can I just say that's the best explanation I've ever seen. I understood every word of that, and it was just so good, and it just helped me. It was that clear, calm space I was asking for in this world of all this chatter on it. So please, thank you. But you know, we've got this whole thing that's seen as a great movement at the moment about open access for journal articles. Is that maybe something that's going to turn out to come back and bite us?
Yeah, it depends on how we want to use this. If we want AI to have access to those journals and we think we could use that usefully and control it, then that could be useful. I did a PhD in Roman artifacts and finds from Ireland. I went on to Bing Chat and I found a find that I had never heard of before. And I did an extensive literature review of every find that had been found in Ireland in museums, in journals, in everything, in online searches. This came back to me in 2 seconds with a find I'd never heard of. That does exist and is real.
So who's going to get to decide if it can do it? Because if we could ask them not to let it, then that would really solve a lot of academic integrity problems. But we don't get that say.
Well, it isn't going to pay for a subscription and it doesn't have access to those things, but maybe, that's going to be a decision, who makes it and who gets access to it. Do you know?
But
I-
this is only one
Yeah.
of many. I mean, there's the Google Scholar and there's the Copilot for science articles. So there are going to be collaborations between the publications and the publishers and new AI tools that actually help academics research anyway. So once there's the tools developed, anyone can get access.
Those big,
I don't think we have a say.
all those big companies that run the academic publishing thing, like Elsevier and them, if you don't think they already have a team working on a version that'll work on their journals, no, it's there happening.
Right. Can I just make a comment? I definitely had a situation where I got an assessment in that was ChatGPT, and basically I asked the students for research methods for researching with children. So that was great. They were able to put all of that in. But the second part of the question was, how would you conduct a piece of research if you had 11 early years children in a setting with an educator, and the research question is, how does the educator use the outdoor environment? So that didn't come up in it. They were able to get all of the if you link it to something that's practical, that they have to, and that's specific, I think that's the way you can work around it, maybe.
Yeah. It's great at generalities. It's super at frameworks, plans, things like that. But if you ask it for, I was going to do a different example just in case one didn't pop up. I was pretty confident one would pop up in your talk, but I had it looking at ring forts in Ireland, which was an essay we used to give first year students in archaeology, form, function, and it was making up sites and making up things. It makes up specifics. It's very good at generalities.
It doesn't know what happened in the science lab yesterday. It doesn't know what happened in the outdoor environment. So it's more context, of a localized, personalized context you can give a student to actually explore in their own areas, the less this can help. Like you said, it'll help with finding frameworks, methodologies and models. But in terms of what actually happened yesterday, I think we I suppose the main purpose of why we were kind of on today was not to really cast too much judgment. We wanted you to see it and kind of think about it yourselves, make up your own opinions and minds, but how you feel about it, because everybody has a very different opinion about its use, and then other people are saying, ban it, it's to go, and it's, you need to make up your own decisions. However, in the Teaching and Learning Centre, myself, Sean and Kevin up the back, we are running some workshops, and we've rolled out one so far this semester, which was just kind of a general one. So this was a little taster of that workshop. We called it Unlocking the Potential. So we are putting a little bit of a positive spin on it with the title Unlocking the Potential. And during that workshop, it's about a 2-hour workshop. We've held it online so far, and it's kind of a discursive in nature. So a bit like what happened here today. We talk about it. We, illustrate some of the key features and the limitations, and we get you to work on it hands-on. That'll be running again next semester, and we're also in development for an autumn delivery, or take a look, I suppose, at that kind of authentic assessment, if we can, within the AI landscape. What can we do, and go back to good pedagogical practices, I suppose, is kind of one of the ways we see of combating this in a way. And the second then is to explore, second workshop might be exploring how we can use it kind of, I suppose, ethically and efficiently for our own teaching and learning assessment practice. We welcome your inputs to those sessions, because
these are discussions, because we're discovering it right now as well in real time with you folks, and you will have the practical experience you already have that we don't with students. So this is all an exploration.
And we are fumbling a little bit in the dark. We don't know, like as a teacher, we don't know what the overall take on the university is or where we're going, the direction. Everybody is exploring it. Every university is exploring it. So we're trying to proactively just start talking about it and helping them in this area. So this has been an advertisement for these workshops, which you see coming to this semester. It's near you. Our first endorsement. Yeah,
team.
Yeah, he's skeptical, and I'm kind of more positive.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
That's about it. Try it out for yourselves, folks. do get a reflection or some assessment you're currently giving a student, pop it in, see what it gives you. Okay,
So
Orla and Sean and Kevin, and as they said, these sessions will be available to colleagues across the ATU, certainly as we start the new academic year. So we're going to now have a break, some coffee. So we will be back in about 11:20. Is that correct, Emma? 15:15. We'll be back online. So we're just having some coffee here, and see you shortly. And my colleague Deirdre McClay, Dr. Deirdre McClay, is going to take over at 11:50. You're okay for that? Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.